Hey guys, Dr. Jake Dodds here. In this video, we're talking about our third foundational layer that we've been leading up to. So we talked about getting energy last video. This video, we're talking about not losing energy. And at first, look, it may seem like those two are pretty similar, like what's even the difference? But adding things and getting energy is a different conversation than making sure that we're getting away from or pushing out the things that are taking that energy away from us. So what does that look like? Well, we're looking at similar categories to what we did last week. And the first one that we talked about was what we call biophysics. And actually, let's start with biochemistry. That was one of the other ones that we talked about. So we have biochemistry. So that was like the things that we're putting in our bodies. This is where a lot of the conversation happens, supplements. So when we're talking about not losing energy, we want to avoid things that are going to be a toxic load in our body and then deplete that energy and deplete our body's ability to heal. So one of the first one that comes up is mold. So mold can really be in a lot of houses, a lot of buildings, particularly like in a damp or wet environment. Anywhere there's running water, like in a lot of houses even, you look around the shower, you look around the kitchen sink, like you can start to see some mold there. So it's something we don't always think about unless it becomes like a huge problem. Like maybe you've heard some horror stories, some houses end up with like this huge black mold infestation kind of thing. So it can get to severe categories where it's obviously a huge problem, but we can also get this like kind of micro exposures throughout the day or like even like a moderate exposure throughout the day. And mold spores can be really toxic, especially if your body's already depleted and already fighting. These are organisms that release spores by the billions. We can breathe them in, you can touch them. And so this isn't like oh my gosh, like we're all screwed because mold's everywhere kind of thing. But I do want to encourage you to think of it as a potential layer that can be affecting your health. Because again, especially when we get depleted, our body isn't able to fight these things as well. And the more load that we have, the harder this all becomes and the less energy that we have. So mold, definitely something to consider. And by the way, for all these, we're probably going to have a specific video on each one of these. So this is our overview. We're going to talk more about each one and things to consider. So the other thing we think of, so bacteria, and this is a common one, right? Like wash your hands, all that good stuff. There can also be co-infections that run beneath the surface. Sometimes there's things like Lyme, or we've been exposed to things. And again, our body can be fighting with not even really recognizing it. So bacteria, obviously, there's some out there that can affect you, particularly when we're talking about gut health. So we'll dive more into this, but mold and bacteria, these things kind of come in groups sometimes as well. So oftentimes, the harder you're fighting, the more these other things sneak in. Bacteria is another one that can climb into the mix. Another one, so this is one that doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but it needs to be talked about more. So what we're talking about here is parasites. Sounds gross, usually not something people want to think about, and usually not super obvious as well, right? Like you may have seen gross pictures or seen some horror stories kind of thing. But again, this is one of those things where a lot of us, as much as we don't like to think about this, probably have some parasites in our body, but obviously our immune system is built to keep that in check and to make sure that's not like a huge problem for our body. But again, the more we start to get depleted and the more we have these type of buildup, parasites can sneak in and it can be another layer to consider. Another one, this one does get talked a little bit more. So heavy metals. Things like cadmium, things like lead, there's a bunch of them out there. It was really kind of a buzz thing for a while where everyone was talking about heavy metals and it kind of phased out. I want to bring it back a little bit because we have a lot of exposure from things even things that are used in industrial chemicals, things that are used even in packaging and printing. Like a lot of the man-made stuff that we have actually does incorporate heavy metals, like even printer ink and that kind of stuff, stuff you wouldn't think about a lot of times. So again, we're talking about cumulative exposure. Like most people don't have a huge lead exposure where it's really affecting them on a very acute basis. But over the days, the weeks, the months, if we have these combination of things going on, heavy metals is definitely something to consider, definitely something that can sit within the body. Another one, and this is kind of piggybacking off this one, I'm going to call it environmental toxins, and I'll just shorthand it here. So really what we're talking about though is chemicals. So we have hundreds of thousands of chemicals that are now registered within our government and within the United States as being actively used on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, they show up everywhere. Again, it's on all the products that we're making from factories. It's from the stuff that we're having shipped to our house. These things are just kind of on everything. Not to mention a lot of times, cleaners, there's this accumulation that happens. I mean, glyphosates are being shipped and produced by the hundreds of billions of pounds per year. So this stuff is in the water, this stuff is in the air. And again, this isn't being oh, we're screwed, but let's recognize that we have a far higher environmental toxin exposure today than we ever have in history, like even 50 years ago. Like it's just exponentially increasing. So the more our health is affected, and especially if you're dealing with something like migraine headaches, it's really important that we're decreasing this load as much as we possibly can. Environmental toxins, those chemicals that show up. So this isn't like an exclusive list, but these are some of the really big players when we're talking about the biochemistry. So when we're talking about making sure we're not depleting our energy, it's going to be really important that we understand these different categories and the action steps that we're going to take on those. Now, again, we also talked about another category last time, and that was our biophysics. So again, this isn't one that gets talked about a whole lot. So what we were talking about last time is making sure we get good exposure from light, making sure that we're getting that good electron exchange with the earth. If you haven't watched that video, make sure you go back and check it out so you know what I'm talking about here. But again, this is the idea that we have our body interacts with our environment in ways that a lot of us haven't been talked to about, or ways that we haven't really thought about ourselves a whole lot before. So similar conversation, but we want to talk about the aspects of this that are depleting our body. So blue light is the first thing that I want to talk about. This is getting to be kind of a popular conversation, but I really want to emphasize this because again, you may have heard like, oh, wear blue light blockers, it'll make so your like eyes don't hurt as much, or like if you get headaches looking at your screen, it may help with that kind of thing. And those are both true. At a fundamental level though, it actually goes way deeper than that. We touched on a little bit last video, but essentially our eyes are a portal to interact with the sun that sets off this whole cascade of hormones and metabolic processes within our body that kind of runs our day. So when we wake up, the sun is showing a certain spectrum and intensity of light. So think like beautiful sunset, you're getting those warm, beautiful reds and oranges, versus in the middle of the day, it's gonna look like a more bright white light kind of thing. So again, the sun changes intensity and color, or at least the relationship with Earth, how the light hits it. Like we see different variations of sunlight throughout the day, and our body runs its clock off of that. So circadian rhythm, again, the cortisol cycle, like how our body is regulating our stress hormones, all built around the color and intensity of light that's coming from the sun. So we don't always think about this, but a lot of us, we're sleeping in past the sunrise, we're then looking at blue light all day. So blue light usually shows up the most intensely right in the middle of the day, high noon, like that's when the intensity of blue light is the highest. So what happens is when we're turning on our phones or our computers first thing in the morning and we get this huge blast of blue light, our brains and our bodies say, oh crap, it's the middle of the day, I need to rev myself up. So cortisol and the stress hormones rev up, our melatonin and those sleep hormones start to get affected and down-regulated. I know a lot of people who have migraines also have sleep issues. So these are really important things to consider. So blue light, believe me, we're gonna be talking more about this, but really, really important when we're talking about making sure that our body is operating appropriately and that we're not just getting super energy depleted. Because again, most of us, without even knowing it, are starting behind the 8 ball to start the day when we're getting like these huge blasts of blue light and we're not mixing in with the other natural light that comes in from the sun. Another one is EMF. So this is kind of a broad catch-all term. Like another way this is described is called a non-native frequency. So essentially, again, like when we're talking about sunlight, when we're talking about like the magnetism of the earth, like there's certain natural frequencies that our body is used to interacting with. Now we have all these frequencies that aren't really inherent to like the natural process of earth. So think like a microwave, right? Like you can turn something on in there, you turn on the microwave, it's blasting this high frequency radiation, high energy waves like into the food or whatever you're heating up, and it's good because it like vibrates the food really quick and heats it up. But again, that's not like a natural process. It's like something that humans designed to enact a certain thing that we want to have happen. So you would of course never like step into a microwave because those energy fields would be super bad for your body and probably kill you kind of thing. So that's super obvious with the microwave, but we don't really think about it for like all these other things that are around us. So obviously a microwave is different, apparatus and everything than things like Wi-Fi, 5G and all that. But we're talking about a kind of similar conversation where we have man-made frequencies that are really high, dense, very energetic wavelengths that our body's not used to. And again, when we're talking about the mitochondria interacting with the environment or our body's ability to produce energy and the cells themselves, they can start to get affected over time when we're just exposed to all these EMFs. And again, it's not just like, hey, you make one phone call and it cooks your brain like a microwave. But over the past 50 years, there's billions of times higher of these types of frequencies that just were not present before. So over the course of human history, our bodies have never had to deal with these kind of things. And all of a sudden, it's just everywhere. I mean, like if you look at your Wi-Fi thing, you usually can see like 10 different Wi-Fi boxes that are available. Again, the 5G and cell phone towers are upping these frequencies in ways that were never present before. A lot of houses have smart meters now where they're sending signals back and forth across the city. Like there's just stuff everywhere. So again, because it is ramping up at such a rate, it's definitely something to consider. And it's this another load that a lot of people aren't considering. So, not that you have to dig a hole under the ground and live there for the rest of your life, but we want to understand how these things can affect our body so we can make sure we're keeping that load down as much as possible. The last thing I want to talk about is radiation. So most people, when they hear radiation, they're thinking Chernobyl, like nuclear plant meltdown kind of thing. So again, like there is like very dramatic things like that have happened. For the most part though, that's not what we're talking about. But what we are talking about is same thing. There's man-made things that we do and produce that are using materials and processes that are upheaving radiation in ways that they weren't before. So like there's a lot of things that we're digging deep beneath the ground, and like a lot of more radioactive materials are coming from beneath the ground. The materials that we're using in some of our packaging and products actually have radioactive elements to them. So same thing, we'll dive more into this, but just understand like there's things that we're dealing with today, and again, even over like the past 50, 30, 20 years that people just didn't have to do before. So you may be thinking like, why do I feel like crap? Or like, how come I know so many sick people and like I can't seem to get better, and there's like, is everyone just getting sick? Unfortunately, yes, a lot of people are. But the more we understand these things, again, it's cool because then you can start to control these things, or at least understand why your body's being affected. Because the hardest part is being like, I feel like crap, I don't know why, and I don't know how to take an action step. We're gonna break these down so you do know why and you do know how to take action steps. So the migraine headaches don't have to be forever. We do need to understand these different things better so we're not just getting all this energy sucked out of our body and we don't have anything left to go through a healing response. So stay tuned. Again, we're gonna be breaking these down more in depth. I wanted you to get the overall picture of like, hey, there can be a lot of different things that your body's dealing with. It's usually not just one thing, it's usually an aggregation of everything. So stay tuned for future episodes. We're gonna keep breaking this down for you and make sure you can make a move forward.